So, we'll go ahead and get started because, as I said, I won't hurt your feelings too much if we finish a little bit early. And you have a lot of writing to do, to be honest with you. And so, I'm going to try to give you some time to do that. So, we're going to talk a little bit about course design a la Dee Fink. And as Kate mentioned, Dee and his associates came to do this institute a couple of times, 3 and 4 years ago, and Lillian attended. I forgot to say that earlier. Lillian has also attended. So what's kind of neat is that we're sort of building this critical mass of people on campus who have an idea about course design. And there may be things that really resonate with you in this model and things that you don't know. But as Kate indicated, it is a pretty good model. I really like taxonomies, and I really like to think about instructional design. And my credentials are in curriculum and instruction, and I do like this model. I think it makes sense. And I think the taxonomy speaks to things that you mentioned in the seminar and in your applications about not just wanting students to know your content, which of course is important, but also caring about it, knowing how to learn about it long term and when they're not in your course anymore. So there are some strategies that you read about that people tend to use when they're designing instruction, and these probably look familiar to you. One is a list of topics. So you sit down or you look in a textbook or somewhere and you think about the topics that are important. It might be that if you're teaching a discipline where it makes sense, like I would think history, you make a list that's chronological. Okay? Mathematics might feel like you make a list that's sequential. And so in some way you make a list of topics, and that's how you organize your course. Another way is a list of activities, and this is something, my main discipline is middle grades teaching. And when I prepare middle grades teachers, a lot of times they think about activities because they're worried, and sometimes rightly so, that their students won't be engaged. And so they think, I just have to have activities that keep them busy. What I need to do is keep them busy so that they're managed. And so sometimes their courses, their classes sometimes look like they don't have much content at all or topics at all. It's just a series of activities. And I have been in classrooms before where I've said, so why are the students doing a word search? And they say, it's the vocabulary words, and it keeps them busy. And I say, what's your learning goal? And really their goal is to keep them busy and keep them out of trouble. So, and there are other ways that activities might look. Do any of you have a discipline where it actually makes sense? I'm going to pick on Leslie for a minute. Like I would think in sciences, maybe it's a lab and a lab and a lab, maybe.
Yeah, but it's linked to the topics, right? Okay. Like that because we're trying to model for the students how we want them to teach. So we want them to do hands-on things with the kids, so we try to teach them that way.
Right, and I guess I'm being a little bit, so I'm probably, at least Fink is saying that these first two approaches are not necessarily good, but they're pretty common. They're pretty common ways to organize courses. And then the third way is an integrated approach, where all the things that you do make sense together in the course. And Kate mentioned backwards design. And we'll talk about backwards design in a minute. So this is some architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I don't know a lot about architecture, but I know that one of the things he really tries to do when he builds or designs something is to integrate it with the natural environment. And so that kind of spoke to me in terms of this. In an integrated course design, the teacher, you, are the one who takes responsibility for thinking about ahead of time and designing instruction where the connections are obvious. And, sometimes I think we leave the students to try to figure out those connections, and I gave you the example of my husband's class where there was never any real discussion except for we're studying a system at a time in the body. But again, there was never even, well, how do those systems work and how do they work together? There was never really any attention to that in the class. So again, it's bad to be married to me. I was asking him questions at home like, yes, but why is that important? And he said, I don't know. It doesn't matter as long as I know how to spell it. So we think about high quality learning And you've already done that by paying attention and writing about situational factors in your class. So we'll come back to those again in a minute. So Kate mentioned that we, with backwards design, want to begin with the end in mind. Emory chose that image. I just want to give him credit. I even thought maybe we should change it. He said, really, it'll be memorable. And I often think in my assessment courses, I think about the idea of a target and the idea that if we want students to meet a target, if we want them to get to a destination, we have to tell them where it is. And a GPS system really works well for me to think about this, that if you're going to use a GPS, the first thing you have to do is find the address. And it used to be that that's not the way we operated. You know, we did know our address, but someone said, well, first you do this and first you do this. We had some human being told us, take this interstate. And we would often, too, say, now, should I go this way or this way? Who thinks the best way? How should I avoid traffic? And a GPS actually will tell you some of that, I guess. But now we have to first know the address, the physical place. Where are we going? And I think if we could all think about telling our students very explicitly in the beginning and in our syllabus, this is where we're going. We are the professionals who are trying to help the students understand that. And then sometimes it is about the journey. So that idea of recursive and excursive, and I imagine in courses like rhetoric and composition, some of you teach rhetoric and composition. I was a writing teacher at the middle grades. We didn't always know exactly where we were going in terms of what that writing might look like. We might know the type of writing we were doing, and we might have some general rules, but there was excursion. But that's okay too, as long as we tell the students that that's what we're doing. When they're guessing, when they have no idea, that certainly is a problem. So an integrated model is relational and not linear. And Kate mentioned earlier, and I know I've worked with folks before who do take out the textbook, and they think, well, they kind of take themselves out of the equation, and they say, someone who wrote this textbook thought this was first, and this was next, and this was next, and so I'm going to organize my course that way. And sometimes then students don't see that relationship. And again, I'm just going to call on that experience my husband had, where even though it was like you study a system, you study a system, you study a system, in the end there was not a lot he knew about physiology. How does that all make sense together? There was no time left for that, and the course wasn't organized in that way. And in the end, that seems like the most important thing. You know, what pathology is it? Like, what happens if something goes wrong with that body part? To me, that seems really important. And last year, we had 6 people from the biology department who came and did Course ReDesign. And one thing, and this was they were designing the biology for non-majors. And one thing that was really important to them, and the way that they approached kind of this idea of integration, was they organized biology as thematic. And so one of them, for example, organized most of the biology concepts that he taught around cancer, something he felt students cared about, and that he could connect almost every concept to. And he's reported back that he had already kind of done a little bit of that, but coming to Course ReDesign allowed him to really take that thematic approach. And he's reported back that it's made a huge difference. And he teaches a class of 240 students. And so having something that seems really engaging and relevant and that has probably touched every student in some way, he said, really has made a difference. And so instead of saying, here's this about biology, and here's this, and here's this, instead of having that sequential, disjointed, they always consider how it relates to cancer. And then there were other themes that the other biology teachers came up with to make their content more accessible, especially to the non-majors. And again, one of the things that was really important to them was something that Dee Fink considers in the idea of human dimension and caring, was that they would not be terrified of biology. Like, that was so important to them, that students would learn the content, but what they felt was such a barrier in their situational context was that students walked in feeling like there's no way I'm going to be successful in this learning this content. So that was really important to them, and they integrated that as part of their design. thinking about, going back to the Frank Lloyd Wright, what's the situation we find ourselves in? And how can we design a course, a curriculum that takes those factors into account? So here are some benefits, according to Fink, of integrated course design. That it's fairly simple, and we'll look at the model in a moment, so it's kind of easy to remember. And again, going back to the idea that we are a campus community, and now we have all these people around campus who are learning this model of course design. So even, let's say you don't like it, it gives us a common point of conversation to talk about. I think you will like it. But it just gives us a conversation we can have, so that if it's across programs, or if we're thinking about what's called vertical alignment of curriculum, courses students take earlier and then later that are building to something else, and then horizontal would be maybe they're taking them all at the same time. In this college, we have block courses, so they're together, and we think about what does that mean horizontally across those courses. So it's holistic in that it does acknowledge the idea of complexity of our courses. We all know that there are complexities, and we're trying to make those, in some ways, walk that balance of making them simple and accessible to students without saying it's really simple, because we know that that's not true either. It's practical because it does give us steps to follow, and if you've never designed courses, it's helpful because it says kind of do this and then do this, and this thing builds on the next thing. It's integrative in that it shows the interaction, as we said, between something like situational factors and the learning goals, and then the activities. How do we have, for example, many of you have mentioned in your application or today, and Beth mentioned the 21st century learning, that students may look a little bit different now. So how do our activities kind of honor those differences? How do they leverage technology in meaningful ways, not just for technology's sake? And then it's normative. So there is a rubric that we can use to evaluate the course, and we will use that, as Kate mentioned, to evaluate the documents that you complete. But more important than that is that you have a tool to look at and think about yourselves, because that, in the end, how you evaluate your teaching in your courses, how your students evaluate your teaching in your courses, is much more important than what we would say about it. But we'll weigh in to give you that kind of a peer review. And while we're here, I wanted to say that in my department, I know that it would be fine for us to use this as a peer review. You could look at how your department would kind of look at that, but I know that last year 6 people in my department went through Course ReDesign, and they could use the review that we'd written, the feedback that we gave back to them, as a peer review. So you could think about that in your own department, because let's face it, really what peer review often looks like is that someone comes to look at what we do for 50 minutes and they write up a little something. But in this case, it's how do you make decisions about course design, and you are setting aside this special time to work on your course. And so I would encourage you, if it makes sense, to ask your chair or someone in your department if this will work as a peer review. And I would argue and advocate for that idea. So this is kind of basically what it looks like. We've been working on your situational factors and thinking about that and sharing it with each other. And the discussion forum kind of became a place of accountability, which was not my intent, although I'm okay with that, where you would say, well, better late than never, or here are mine. But the idea, too, was that we would be sharing those, because even though each of us has our own individual situation, we also share a situation in that we're in the same institution with those same, as Kate mentioned, those strands that we have, the things that we might emphasize in our various departments, but then there are unique things that you have too. So we think about our learning goals, and that's where the connection to threshold concepts comes in, and to Dee Fink's taxonomy. What in the end do we want our students to learn, to gain from the courses? And that's how you will think about your learning goals, and hopefully you've already given some time to that, and thinking about what are the outcomes that you want students to have. And then you think about what assessment looks like. How will you know? So first, learning goals. And then next, we often don't go here next. This is the backwards design part. How will you know that students have achieved those goals? That really is your second consideration, thing to think about next. How will you know? How will you assess that? How will you provide feedback? And in my department this year, something that a discussion was pre-back. So instead of always waiting until students turn something in as a summative evaluation of some sort, but while we're in the process, so that idea of formative feedback while the thinking is in process. Writing people do that all the time, and some of you do that in your disciplines, but often, so even something like a quiz, if we do it one time and we give students a grade, that's not that people talk about that as formative, but it's not. That's definitely a summative evaluation when you give the grade and you only gave one opportunity to do that. So those are some of the things that we'll talk about this week as well. And then after you've determined how you're going to know if they got there, then you think about, okay, what do I need to do? What are the teaching and learning activities that will get students to those learning goals? So this is the basic design. Do you want to comment about what this design, how do you feel about it? You know, we have the benefits according to Fink, but what do you think? Does it make sense to you? Is it foreign to you, Lily?
A question about assessment. I don't remember what Fink was saying. Is assessment always from the teacher, the instructor, or are there ways we can put in assessment from our students and those other sort of things?
I guess I don't know exactly what Fink says, but so I would say it can come from multiple sources. Certainly peers. Sometimes even like an authentic audience is really great if we have opportunities to share in that way. A few years ago, I attended something where there was the idea. I mostly teach graduate students now, and there was this idea of students trying to develop identities as public intellectuals. So they would have to share their ideas on a blog and get feedback not just from people in their peer group, but from others, like from an external kind of an audience, or they at least have that available. And they were having to take positions on things in education and higher education and K-12 education. And I remember the speaker saying what a huge difference that made because it was authentic. They were getting feedback about your point doesn't make any sense. You don't have any evidence for what you're saying. And that really changed how they learned and how they wrote as that public intellectual. And so definitely peer review too. And this week we'll have concurrent conversations with representatives from LTS on Thursday, and then a time called an open lab on Thursday afternoon. And there's a tool in there called the workshop tool. It's had kind of a soft rollout. And a few people that I know, I've used it, and a couple other people have used it, and it gives an opportunity for students to give feedback to each other. They can be randomly assigned to do that. And then you can evaluate the kind of feedback you give. And it also tells you kind of how far out. If I had 5 people evaluate Lindsay's work using a rubric, and Lillian it'll give you a measure about was Lillian much more generous than the others. So it helps you to have a conversation in the class about the value of that feedback. So I don't mean to get too far in the weeds on that, but just in terms of thinking about, there are tools and models definitely for incorporating peer feedback and authentic audience feedback. And Lillian is going to do a workshop for us tomorrow on collaborative assessment. So looking forward to that. So the course design process, you have in your handouts a course decision guide, and it's posted in our Learn site as well. But we'll go ahead and take a moment. It looks like this. Planning your course decision guide. And so, hear ye, the 2 things that you will complete and turn in at the end of this process, at least these 2, are a completed course decision guide, answering these questions and talking about situational factors and learning goals and so forth. And the second thing is a syllabus that reflects this decision guide. So it should be, you wouldn't have learning goals here that aren't in the syllabus. Wow, that word escaped me. And so you wouldn't say here, I'm going to give lots of opportunity for interaction, and then your syllabus would say lecture on chapter 1, lecture on chapter 2, lecture on chapter 3. So you want them to be aligned. And I know that that's kind of a lot to do all at once, but in the end, the syllabus is where your students get to see the redesign. This captures kind of your decision, and you can even be a little, it's not necessarily conversational, but this one's a little bit more reflective and a little bit more how you're thinking about things. So this is available in your As You Learn site as a Word document, and many of you already used it to do the situational factors, but you'll work your way through this week and continuing, and revise the syllabus. So that's the end of the hear ye, hear ye. I just want to make sure that was clear. So we're going to talk, yes, Leslie.
So at the end, do you need to see our old syllabus and our new syllabus, or just the new one?
No,
okay.
I think just that the syllabus reflects this thinking. It's a good question, though, and a good one to think about in terms of, I think for our purposes, we'll review the new one and see about it being reviewed there. But if I can go back to the peer review conversation for just a moment, Leslie's in my department. So as she asked that question, I think about it a little bit differently. If she came to me as a peer in my department and said, could you help me think about, like, I had this was my syllabus before, and this is my syllabus now, and I'd like to have either a conversation or a review about the change from this to this. And some of you have talked about, Larry mentioned that, you're working with others, you teach a similar course. And so there might be others who aren't here who might teach a similar course, who teach a course before you or after you. And so to kind of expand on your question, Leslie, I think sharing it with other folks might be really a valuable experience. My department chair would value the idea in my annual review that I talked about the difference between old and new. But I know departmental cultures are different. But I think you can raise the level of conversation.
I mean, our tenure document also says that, right? That you show how you've changed.
Yep, it does. And if I don't know if I know that that's specific in some ways to our department, but showing that sort of either maturation or just that you're always looking into teaching would be something I think to share with others in your department. So thanks for that question. I don't think we need it because we're looking more at what the course looks like and does it reflect kind of this design, this thought process. Any other questions before we talk about the process just a bit? Okay. So there are 3 phases to think about, and they're captured here in your document. And the first one is kind of building these primary components of the course. And you've done a lot of that already. Many of you have. Some of you haven't, but there's no guilt here. Now is your opportunity to begin to think about that. And then there's the intermediate phase where you're kind of putting those things into the whole. And if I could go back to the biology example, the teacher who kind of put the theme of cancer really didn't until the kind of end of the week come to that idea. And so some of these pieces may come even after this week as you think about, is there a way, is there an integrated whole, are there threshold concepts that will really bring all this together? That may happen this week, it may happen a little bit after this week, just to kind of get that in your mind. And then the final phase, taking care of important details, will often come up in your syllabus, things like how to grade. And so, how many of you use the As You Learn grade book? Guys, that? Okay, that's helpful. It's about to change on Friday, so and what I hear that some changes are going to be great, and some, I don't know. So it's just all a big surprise, and I think you'll have an opportunity to see some of the unveiling of that on Thursday with our LTS folks who are going to be here. But I use the grading, and I use advanced grading and run reports because we have to do that in my department. But the grading is something that's one of the taking care of important details, because that detail is really important to your students. And so some of the things that we hear on campus is, if you could just decide points or percentages, that would be really helpful for your students. Because when you try to combine them, so certain things are percentages and certain things are points, students get really frustrated because they don't know what their grades are. And so those are some things, though, that might be helpful to have a consult about later. I have really complicated grades, and I always have to have a consult with Mary Beth McKee to work on my grade book. And she gets it, and many of them do. They're thinking about, what is it you're trying to accomplish? But the idea, if we think about backwards design, if we think about being kind of transparent about what we want, what makes our students really uncomfortable, we talked about trust and feeling safe, is that we have so much of this kind of the idea that we look at sort of the grades and then we want to add or take away depending on how our students pleased us or not. Their overall pattern of behavior. And that really leads to our students not feeling safe. You know, my husband and his courses, when he had no idea when the grade book wasn't turned on or he didn't know how he was doing, it was really frustrating. And I kind of got to see that side of it. And also, I know that faculty in the last couple of weeks, they don't know how to make sense of their own grade book. So they have a bunch of grades, but the math isn't working out. And I'm kind of challenged in the math area. So I guess this important detail, this is your chance to make sure before you go into the course that you're ready for that it makes sense in a way that feels good to you and that will be clear to your students. I think personally that we owe them that. So that's an important details kind of piece. And also thinking about what could go wrong is a troubleshooting piece that comes up in that final phase. So this is just a little bit more, I'm not going to read this to you, but these are the pieces that are in the initial phase. You've already worked on, many of you, the situational factors and learning goals. And they're in the first couple chapters of the Dee Fink text. One of you asked me today, do I need to read this entire book? And that's up to you. I did kind of ask you to read chapters 1, 2, and 3 to kind of prepare. And the rest is kind of a resource for you. And we also have some resources in As You Learn in a book tool. Maybe I'll have Henry show you that in a little bit. And we invite you, if you say, you know what, I found this site that is so great about assessment, or I found a wonderful resource related to discussion and strategies. We would love to know that so we can build this as a resource. You may know this. This is a goal of mine, is that As You Learn can be self-enrollable, so you can kind of turn it around. Instead of we enrolled all of you, you can have people enroll themselves. And I'd really love at some point to have a course where new faculty or people who couldn't come to Course ReDesign, but they really want to work on their course, could enroll themselves. But it would be so much better and more robust if you could offer to us resources that have been really great for you related to these various pieces. So we certainly invite you to do that. And if you have resources, if you could probably shoot an email to Emery and or me, we'll get those in there. So that would be so great. So where are you? That situational factor. Where do you want to go? Where do you want your students to go? And how will you know when you get there? We talked about that in terms of assessment. And how are you going to get there? What's the journey going to be like? What's necessary for students to experience, read, do in order to get there? And then who and what can help? And again, the concurrent conversations we're having on Thursday, we've invited people from all around campus that will come and sit with you and talk about. So, for example, we'll have someone, Lee Ball, who's on the curriculum committee of the Sustainability Initiative. He will be here. We have folks from all over campus. That list is included in your agenda. So we want you to know that there are resources here on campus. Also, I think it's really helpful to know what resources aren't here. I think that's a really great question for us to consider so that we can think about how do we identify. I was talking to a faculty member today who was sharing with me resources that had not been available to her, and she's leaving, actually. And I was thinking two things. One is, I knew of some resources. I wish I'd known that she needed them. and maybe I could have helped. But then the other thing, of course, I was thinking is some of those resources, yeah, we didn't have them. So it's helpful for us to have that conversation. So as you're thinking about your topics and structure, thinking about it overall, what are the learning goals? Now you can get into the topics and themes or ideas, what the students will need to do, and maybe even the details of that. So the danger sometimes with something like this is you see a PDEA seminar or some other strategy and you say, ooh, I think I like that. But you really have to start with what are your learning goals, and is that an activity that makes sense to get to your learning goal? And then what is the overall scheme of the learning activities? How many of you are designing a course that is either going to be offered hybrid or online? I think more of you said that in your applications. Okay, yeah, so 2 hands.
I did, but they told me I couldn't.
Okay. And how many of you, well, I know that 7 of you, but I'd like to see who you are, mention that you'd be interested in knowing more, or you already have this, or you want more of this, of the flipped classroom model. Okay. So as you think about the overall scheme of the learning activities, I know I'm teaching a course this summer that's an online course. It's only 4 weeks. And trying to change, when you've taught a course one way and now you're trying to change it, you have to think about the relationship between the in-class and out of class, and how does the reading make sense, and what's going to happen between class meetings. And for me, I'm going to have synchronous and asynchronous. And so that's a little bit about what's this overall scheme. What does it make sense for students to do asynchronously? What does it make sense to do synchronously online? Or what does it make sense to do face-to-face? What does it make sense to do apart? And several of you who know, a few years ago, we went through designing hybrid courses in the middle grades program, and a book I loved that really challenged me was called How to Design and Teach Hybrid Courses by Jay Caulfield. And the thing that was just continues to challenge me is that she talked about, okay, your course changes, so now you have online pieces. But that means that when you meet face-to-face, what is it that's so magical and transformative that you could not have done that online? And so it changed the way that I thought about my face-to-face time. It became really precious in terms of the way I was thinking and planning. So I didn't come together and have us it wasn't any more of that, let me ask a question and everyone respond, because I can do that in a discussion forum. It wasn't us coming together and taking a test, because I can do that, in another way. But I can't do that. We're going to do a World Cafe this week. Can't do a World Cafe online. Can't do literature circles online. What is it? We can't eat together online. It's not nearly as fun. And to me, that's important. Breaking bread together, sharing time where we're eating and having caffeine, whatever it is that nourishes us, is important to me. So the overall structure of whatever your situation is something to kind of think about. And Fink represents that in this kind of castle top model that you'll see in the book. And then that final phase, we were talking about how are you going to grade it? What could go wrong? So your what's gone wrong for you before in classes? Anything? No, that's all smooth. Man. So, 4 snow days in a row. Okay.
In my class, for this class in designing, what often goes wrong is once the students decide on what they're going to research and they go out there, things go wrong, like the people who agreed to interview with them don't show up, or so then they don't have a project and they panic.
Yes.
So that almost always goes wrong, turns out.
Okay. Yes.
Very poor if one member isn't required.
That's an easy one. I'm just kidding. Group work and one person doesn't do what they're supposed to do. People ask me about that all the time. They go, oh yeah. What else? Anything going wrong with you guys over there?
Technology.
Not enough time to cover all the content I've stuffed in my facility.
Okay. We can fix that one. We can fix that one. Okay, running out of time, especially when you do have snow days. And
I had a students, I guess group of students who worked on a research project, I guess evaluation project of organization, and they received a no answer from that organization and still pursued to contacting people and citing that organization as a reference against them as kind of part of the project. And so we received very angry emails saying that you have to immediately stop all their activities. So we had a very serious talk with students, and we obviously immediately stopped all the activities. But that was just very learning experience for the whole class.
yeah, you have a research class maybe where
Right.
students need IRB approval and
Right.
get it. Okay, well that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or something else goes wrong with that. Eric, you were going to mention something.
I was going to say, writing assignments where students don't really answer the question. You're not getting back what you thought you were.
And you raised such a good point there too about, we talked about vulnerability too, kind of acknowledging, wow, that didn't go the way I thought. And we have a tendency, I think, sometimes to say it was the student's fault. And sometimes it is, clearly. But sometimes I know I've had situations where it was a pattern and it was maybe my fault. Something wasn't clear. And so, but even, okay, what am I going to do? Okay, it didn't go the way I thought. Now what am I going to do? So acknowledging those things that come up. Yeah. And then evaluation. How will you know that the course is going, how it's going and how it went? So we often, some departments, some colleges on campus have a common evaluation instrument. Some do not. Until not many years ago in my own department, we just kind of made up our own thing. So what questions do you need to ask to know how it went? And how are you going to do that? How can students be given anonymity in some situations, maybe at the summative, but also a midterm evaluation is great to ask students how it's going. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but I think it not only does tell you how it's going, but it also says to the students, I care about how this is going for you. And so doing that's really helpful. So how are you going to know, besides necessarily that end of semester student evaluation? And again, I would encourage you, there are classes on campus that students don't get to evaluate. I feel like there's just a real ethical problem there. So certainly give them the opportunity to give you that feedback and then try to incorporate it. So as you think about, this is actually a classroom. Emory took this picture here on our campus. This is a classroom here. And some of you, do any of you teach in a room that looks like this? Okay, so some of you teach in rooms that look just like this. Okay, so what are some issues with that situation?
No windows.
Okay, no windows.
It's really cold.
Okay.
Or
Or really hot. Okay.
no left-handed desks.
Mm-hmm.
It's created for a teacher-centered environment. I mean, the focus is on the instructor in the front. It's not set up for conversations among students or discussion among students.
I actually like that because I can actually move the desks to make it that way, where other rooms you can.
But if you move the desks, you may get complaints from faculty below you or comment after you because of the noise of moving the
Herd of
desks.
elephants is the comment that's,
Yeah.
herd of elephants.
Yeah. And I've also seen signs like, if you move the furniture, please put it back in the rows and, so, yeah, I mean, that,
There's only one plug.
all the charts and computers are in. I know that seems like such a small thing, but for this institute, we have a suitcase over here of extension cords. You might not know this, but we have 3 Wi-Fi boosters in here so that when all of you are online, so you can make it look seamless, but we did try to plan for that because if you weren't able to all get online when we have writing time in here, it would be really frustrating. So yeah, having one plug is not a great idea. Yes.
But that brings up to another situational factor,
Okay.
which is students using their laptops in class and all the things that creates. And I have went back and forth between allowing it and then totally saying, no one can use them. I really struggle with the technology.
As you're saying that, I'm going to give Emery a task. I've seen some really great syllabi that have language related to how students use technology and devices. So we're going to see if we can find that. Actually, a colleague in my department, Damiana Gibbons, she has nice language in her syllabus, and we could probably find some others where you have it's not a it's not a no technology or I allow it and ignore it kind of strategy, but it's more deliberate. The other thing I saw that was kind of genius at a conference recently was the person at about the halfway point gave everyone a 2-minute technology break. So they could send a text, they could do whatever, they could check Facebook, they had 2 minutes, and he said, and I did it too, I checked my phone, I sent a text. And so he had in his syllabus, like, I will give you that break, and he had actually some kind of thing, like a pink hippopotamus or something on his slide, and he got to the slide of the pink hippopotamus and started like a timer, and there were 2 minutes where students could text, look at Facebook, whatever, and when the 2 minutes was up, they asked them to put it away again. I don't know if that's, the answer. It's so pervasive, but we'll look into that.
I have a totally different perspective.
Okay.
To me, it's competition. And granted, I lose sometimes. But when I see students doing things on the computer and using their cell phones for things I don't want, it's time for me to up my game. And I lose sometimes.
Yeah.
Don't want to.
I'd much rather pay attention to you, Larry, than my own cell phone. But I feel like
Well, your old cell phone didn't have pictures or a computer. Of course you'd rather look at
I know. I don't know how to use my cell phone.
Yeah.
so I'm safe, but I think that's good. And I think, Cindy, that's such an important point. And it, in the situational factors where you had to think about your own characteristics, teacher characteristics, that's a place where we have to be honest with ourselves and think about both the situation and then how we respond to it. Because if we're offended by the technology, I find myself in different, like my undergrads, I have a little bit different approach. I feel like the police, though. And so in my graduate class, something I say to my students is education is the only commodity where we're happy to get less for our money. But I am here to give you every penny worth. I want to make sure you get the most of your money. So please, put your technology away because you are here. I'm going to give you everything I got. But I don't know the answer to that one either. Yeah, we probably should have a space in here where we're putting up the questions that we don't have answers to. Maybe we'll find the answers to.
As far as technology goes, I had to understand my own self, and I feel like I'm dating them, and if I'm on a date, I don't want my date looking at his thing, and I'm sort of put off by that, and so it really distracts me. I feel like I'm not doing a good job if I have to be looking at that. And so I'm going to bring it in tomorrow before our group assessment meeting. But I have a shoe rack that is clear pockets, and I have them put their cell phone in, and so that's how I take attendance. That means that I tell them, if you're here, and your body's here, and your phone is in the shoe rack, which I call the cell phone rack, then I know their brain is in their body, and we have this relationship together, because I have to be there. I mean, how would it be if I'm just scrolling through pictures during the class? But that's just because I can't handle it. I'm really distracted by it. It throws me off completely. So I make them, and I have not gotten into these things, and they're fresh enough. And I just say, put it up there.
Power over them.
I do. Stomp them down. And then, and I can say 7 and 9 are missing, and I take and roll that day. And they have the same mode all semester.
How many students?
22. Now I've got 22. We got 240. That's a lot of investing.
Martha, you had.
Well, I was just going to say that we're not supposed to take the funds from people who are first responders or there's other things like that with our university policy with that, or if they're part of the emergency alert, they just have to have it on vibrate. But I mean, there's a way in which we have so little control over that with a lot of our students.
I was told we could take them away as long if we had our own cell phone and we were on that alert system.
Oh, okay.
Then we could take theirs away. Yeah.
But if they're not at the emergency, but if they're a first responder or something
Right.
else, then
That's
they have to
yes.
keep
You just
theirs.
never know where this course design conversation will
Gail, you had a
I haven't had a problem until recently that in my class syllabus, they're only allowed, and these are sophomores, only allowed 3 absences. Anything over that, the grade goes down. But if I find them using an electronic device for anything other than our class, they're counted absent. I mean, it's just clear absence, and they quit. Especially with only 3 absences, and they are required to use their laptops in class because I try to have a paperless classroom. And it has worked. I mean, I tell them they're adults, they should know when and when not to use through technology. And until last semester, I had a problem with one student, but it's been working for me.
Thanks. You know, this seems like a random time to bring it up, but sometimes you remember random things better than if they're just in sequence. So over there on that table, there is, do you see that Post-it pad standing up that says lunch table topics? There's one Post-it already on it. I would invite you this week, tomorrow and Wednesday, tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesday and Thursday, when we have lunch, we'll have some opportunities. If you want to talk about a certain topic, we can have people at a table who want to talk about that topic. And then if you want to just have more of a social lunch, that's okay. We're not going to force you when you're talking about a topic. But if there's a topic you'd like to have the group consider or have a group consider, if you'll put it on a Post-it note on the tablet, then we'll set up some tables like that. And maybe this is a good table topic to hear different ways that people are, either leveraging technology in their classes in great ways or controlling it in other ways. I think that might be a good conversation to have. So, have a good class, Leslie.
Thank you. Sorry. You're good.
So, in terms of the situational factors, you've already visited these, but I was interested in knowing what were some of your pedagogical challenges? Because I think we want to help each other with those this week. What were some of those? Do you have one? Are you about to? Go ahead.
I forgot how I worded it. Right now I'm not going to word it really well.
It's okay.
That and somebody kind of alluded to this earlier about privilege and coming into a room kind of particular students feeling that they either are more knowledgeable than you on a particular subject or all the other students in the room. And that this privilege means they don't necessarily need to do anything in order to get a good grade in class.
No, I definitely. Everybody's been to school, so they clearly know how to be a teacher. I have, so they keep going, I got this. Yes.
I think in my case, it's a problem, not a problem, challenge, I guess, that a lot of times students think that recreation management is something where they're going to teach you to rock climb and have fun and be outside, and it's just going to be absolutely lovely. And so when they come to class with research methods, it's like you have to actually read and understand something that is maybe a little bit more difficult than, doing something fun. So I think that's my hardest, I guess, to just shift their mind from that active and perception, I guess, of just I'm here because I love what I do and I enjoy. So to switch them, how do you like research as well and how you find it, I guess, important for your profession? That's what's hard.
So this is actually a little bit of a pattern in the applications too. Can you raise your hand if you teach research methods? Yeah, so you might want to look at each other. Raise your hand and look at each other so that you kind of get a sense of other people might have some similar pedagogical challenges. Maybe not exactly that one, but I thought sociology is about Facebook. It's not? or whatever, whatever, however they simplify the whole major and discipline. Okay. Any other pedagogical challenges that you want to mention?
Prerequisite knowledge is huge, and then, they come from calculus, we got to be doctors, and then
So prerequisite knowledge.
So the class I'm redesigning is psychology of adulthood and aging. And my pedagogical challenge is getting my students to realize that they are future older adults.
It's getting easier for me to understand all the time. Eric?
Along the same lines, diverse student background. So some with some majors and some non-majors. Some with different background, knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Trying to teach at a couple different levels at once. So we're trying to get from 16.
I usually teach, really almost always teach students who are in the major or at least in the college. But how many of you teach courses where you have both people like in your major or your program and not? Yeah, I hear this issue is really difficult. And sometimes people, in terms of the differences, I think teaching in the major and teaching graduate students is actually more alike because we tend to group undergraduate education and graduate education, but actually if you've chosen the discipline, I think the teaching is more alike and the challenges are more alike. So that's something to think about. I think we tend to say gen ed or undergraduates. It's not that simple. All right, well, we should be able to solve these problems this week. So the specific context with the number of students, the kind of classroom you have. I had someone I worked with for a while in the academy that I facilitate. She was teaching world music in a recital hall with chairs bolted to the floor and wanted to use all kinds of interaction. And not only that, but it had a stage. And this thing was at the back of the stage. So she would come down and teach everybody and try to get real in the middle of them. And then she would say, okay, now we're going to listen to a piece of music. And then to the stage and to the back of the stage to listen to a 45-second clip back there. Okay, so that was really a difficult, kind of situation. That context of that classroom was very challenging in terms of what she was trying to do. And so obviously you may have some kind of challenge related to that, or online too. Context. Where is the course in the curriculum? We were just talking about that a little bit. Is it gen ed? Is it in the major? What comes before? What comes after? So thinking about the context there. What prerequisite knowledge or not do students have? Is the subject always changing? Think about technology always changing. I probably have stereotypes about some disciplines and think, what could change about that, really? But they probably are constantly, changing. And so helping, we have to constantly renew ourselves and know about the subject and what's new in the subject. And then we have students with all these characteristics that you've already mentioned several times today, their prior knowledge and attitudes, their maturity, entitlement, things like that. And I think this is a real opportunity to get real about who we are as teachers. And I put into the course, if you have no idea or if you've never looked really at your teaching philosophy, you don't have to have a title for it. There are titles for philosophies of teaching. Are you an existentialist or an essentialist or progressivist? There are labels that you can give yourselves. But I think just knowing, I can't stand the competition of social media or whatever it is, just being true to who you are and your experience. There's a teacher in our building named Jeff Goodman. I don't know if some of you know him, but he has this huge personality and a great reputation for teaching. And some people will come to me because I have the role of kind of talking to people about their teaching in this college, and they'll say, I'm no Jeff Goodman. I mean, sometimes they'll say, I'm no Jeff Goodman. And I think, well, you don't have to be Jeff Goodman. And my own dissertation research was to try to show that expert teaching can look a lot of different ways. But I think sometimes we get in our heads that good teaching looks a certain way, or that it's a certain way of being animated or something like that. But I think we have to be true to who we are and think about it. And sometimes we have to stretch ourselves, too. And then those special pedagogical challenges, like a classroom like this, and a chalkboard. What kind of challenges do we have? I bet the students are really engaged with that. That looks like my econ class from undergrad. So we talked about this before, learning targets, letting students know, and you being very explicit about where we're going and developing those learning goals. That's something hopefully you've already begun to think about and that you'll have a chance to do this week. But just being very clear about where you're going. And then I really like taxonomy, so I'll just put that out there. But I do really like this one. I like that it acknowledges the idea of knowledge and application and skills. And the integration, but I also love that it acknowledges the idea that there's human dimensions to learning and caring about the discipline and learning how to learn in the discipline. So those research methods courses are ways that we're designing, that's really heavy on that one, I would think, is learning how to learn in this discipline and to stay current. But I know you've already kind of taken a look at this, and in the course decision guide, kind of broken out so you can try to think about learning goals in each of these areas. If you just can't, then we can talk about it. I don't want you to force something that just doesn't work. I don't know that I've seen a discipline for which it doesn't, but I've only done this one at a time with a group, from across campus, so that's possible. And Emery and I had a discussion this week about there's another kind of measure of quality for online courses called Quality Matters, QM. And in the QM rubric, it says if you have a learning goal, you must have an assessment for it. And I actually kind of believe that, really, as an assessment person. But I'll tell you that one of the tensions with this is that some of these human dimensions and dispositional things are a little bit harder to measure. I'm not saying we shouldn't measure them, but we may not have an assessment in our syllabus that says this is how we're going to measure that. So in my discipline of language arts, when I was a middle school teacher, I wanted my kids to love reading. I wanted to find the book that would just light them on fire so they would love to read, and that they would say, I'm a reader. Because they often came to me saying, I don't like to read. I'm not a reader, I'm not a writer. I'm a talker, maybe not. So a lot of what I was trying to do as a middle school teacher was to get them to see themselves differently. No, you are a reader. Maybe you love to read Sports Illustrated, but, and not just the swimsuit issue. But let's talk about what kind of reading you like to do. I want you to know I'm still kind of feeling a little bit of I don't know how I feel about that. I'd love to consider that with you this week. Are these harder are these that are the human dimension, caring, learning to learn, are they harder to measure than foundational knowledge? I'd say they probably are harder than foundational knowledge. And then assessments and feedback, this is kind of just a general feedback cycle. This slide is available for you in case you're interested in it. But feedback, just these kind of principles of being as specific as possible, the sooner the better, involve learners in the process. You mentioned something like that, Lillian. Address the learner's advancement toward a goal, and then present the feedback carefully. So then there are other little details. But that third one, address the learner's advancement toward a goal. So I don't mean to get kind of preachy about this, but I teach an assessment course here in this college, and students talk about their experiences here, and we talk about how grades are given. And so one of the ways, sometimes in a class, they get a paper back, and it says B. And so I had a student who said, in fact, I wrote an article that I opened with this line as like an epigraph at the top. She said, why is it a B, to her teacher? And he said, it just felt like a B. So this is a problem because it doesn't address the learner's advancement toward a goal. The students have so the goal now is for me to write a paper that feels like an 80. And that's not a learning goal. That's manipulation or something. I don't know what that is. Maybe the psychology and sociology people among us can help us to understand a little bit more about that approach to assessment. But helping our students understand how are they progressing toward that learning goal that you established. That's what they need to know. Lillian will talk about collaborative assessment tomorrow, and I hope this isn't, I don't think she's talking about this, but I have come to use the quiz tool in As You Learn. I didn't used to use it at all, and I just use it really in one, well, maybe 2 classes. But my students can take a quiz many times because I just want them to keep seeing the items and think about the items. And now I'm a little more careful. So now I say, you can take it unlimited times, but you have to have a certain amount of time between when you take it. And why would I do that? Yeah. So maybe they'll go back and look at the material. There's also some research in a book called Make It Stick that says actually people do remember something if there's a little bit of time and space between times that we assess them. But they often do, take advantage of that. If I had a really wonderful item bank, which I don't always have, I can just have different items aligned to the various goals that they keep seeing. They may even see different questions, but they're aligned to the certain learning goals. But thinking about how we design assessment and give feedback. So if it's helpful to you, I have a little item template. I actually have my graduate students who are in my classes, they can design items and put them into As You Learn. Everybody's going, oh, don't tell people that. But the thing that's really helpful, they have to learn a lot of cases for law cases and policy for a licensing exam. So they have to create, they can say what the topic is. Maybe it's a certain law case. Then they have to write a little description of it, and that can go in general feedback in the quiz. I won't get too far into this. Then they have to write the correct answer to their question, and 3 distractors that are good distractors that are pretty close. And then they have to write why the correct answer is correct and why the incorrect answers are not. Okay, but why they're close. They have to write about the relationship between the distractor and the correct answer. And I actually let them I tell them to take it twice, unlimited amount of time, and they get a grade just for taking it twice. So take hours, go research the cases, because my goal is for you to pass your licensing exam, not really to pass the quiz here. And so it kind of changes the nature of things. Now, in that case, they have a licensing exam. We're trying to help them prepare for it. It's different maybe, but they really appreciated that kind of a model. And even creating items. They say, so then they learn about whatever thing they're researching, plus they have to learn about 3 other items that are close, but they have to learn the variance. So anyway, it gives them feedback that's specific, and it's quick too, once we kind of take the time to establish it. So the active learning, how are you going to get there? Hopefully this week you'll spend some time, depending on where you've started, how much you came today, having done, how are you going to get your students to that place of learning? And who and what can help. These are some of the resources to think about here on our campus that are available to you, and folks from these various groups will be here to talk to us throughout the week. And then the intermediate phase, again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this right now, but this is in your document. If you have questions, please feel free to ask those. It's just returning to these in the final phase. So here's a suggested timeline for you to think about. You don't have to do it exactly in this order, but this is how I thought about it, is that the situational factors and learning goals would be complete. If they're not, you might want to be busy on that. Feedback and assessment, you have exactly 1 day to think about that. But you might begin to think about some of that tomorrow. We'll have a workshop, 2 in fact, because Universal Design for Learning will also attend to guiding feedback and assessment. And then teaching and learning activities. So the idea is that you're going to give some thought to these initial components this week. Okay. You won't have them all finished, but you'll kind of flesh them out a little bit, or begin to think about them a little bit. And then the intermediate phase, maybe through the rest of May, the final phase, maybe in June, and then turning in which two things? A syllabus and a course decision guide by the end of, or by June 15th. Okay. So, any questions about what you're to do? Yes, they're there. They're there. Let me show you one thing. So I told you about the lunch conversations, the lunch table topics. I have a couple more announcements, and I'll get some help with those. And let me just draw your attention here. Course Redesign 2015. Hopefully you put it in there. So the way I generally set things up is, here's day one, and this is what you did today-ish. And so here's a link to that text, the threshold concepts. Here, these are the slides. This is the overview of the course redesign process. I'll pull this up. Oh, I think we already had it before. Sorry. This is don't hate on me, but this is one I've done for one of my courses. So last year I was working on teaching this course, maybe for the second time, but for the first time 100% online and asynchronously. And so this is an example, not a perfect one, but so this is my attempt to talk about the situational factors. This is kind of a combination of course guide and, well, it's not a syllabus. My challenges and how I'm responding to those challenges. So it's important not only that we think about them, but, and you can even say, I'm still not sure what to do about this one, but I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to try this. So how are you responding to them? Where we want to go. So here I also we have certain standards in our profession. I mean, we all have standards in our profession, but we actually have these articulated standards people have to meet for licensure. And so I have incorporated those so that I'm acknowledging, okay, this is my job to make sure that we incorporate these pieces. And then here are the learning goals. I probably have too many, but I'm ambitious that way. And then this is how the standards and language are all related, and how I'm assessing those standards and outcomes. You don't have to have that piece, actually. It's not part of your template, but how will we know if we get there? So here's a general idea of my evaluation and assessments. And then I organized mine this way with the, I think Fink talks about a 3-column table, and I put 4 columns. My learning goal, how am I going to evaluate that learning goal? What activities to help my students meet that goal, and what resources do I need? So in case that's helpful, let's see. Another thing with learning activities, I use a strategy called read, view, and do. Very simple. But especially in my online, it keeps me from just students always doing reading. So I try to incorporate reading, viewing, and then doing something with the reading and the viewing. And students, it rhymes. So that helps, read, view, do. And it kind of keeps me honest that it's a little more active even if it's online. And then here's some signature assessments in my class. That's what I call them. And then these are kind of the general. Here's the course description from the catalog, some activities and experiences, which were actually up in that chart. Really, almost everything's on the chart. Online delivery. So some of these start looking like some of the syllabus. Some of these looks like the syllabus. Now, in my assessments, I don't think this one reflects it, but I break it into knowledge and performance. and I try to show my students that I weigh if the course makes sense to do this, that I weigh the performance assessment more than the knowledge. But you have to have the knowledge before you can get to the performance. But my quizzes that I was telling you about, they weigh almost nothing. They'll work so hard for that 5% or 10%, especially since I'm giving them the opportunity to just keep reading the materials. And so I'll really hang in there with those. And this is course assignments. And now, maybe this might be too much information, but this is another, I really like a chart. It helps me to just kind of organize my thinking. And so then this is kind of my week by week. And this is what students often see. And then what I do, I showed you how I have the page that had these little, had the link to the slides. So this, I make a web page from this and put it into the Agile course. So they'll see what they need to do to prepare for class, and then sometimes they'll see the reading that you've been doing. I don't have anything on there. I guess this was an earlier iteration before I got that run down. The reading that you've been doing. And that's probably about it besides that. So that's a long document, but those of you who know me and those of you who don't know, it's just how I am. I'm long. And charts take up a lot of space, and sometimes there's big white spaces in them, but it just helps me to see how things are aligned. It keeps me kind of honest. Okay, so it's been quite a day for you guys. It's a lot of information. But tomorrow, we are going to have, Lindsay is going to do a workshop for us on universal design. Emory and I are going to have you look at some examples of course guides, and we're going to analyze those together. And Lillian is going to do something on collaborative assessment for us. So while I'm here, I'm going to show you something, and then Liz is going to show you a little bit about what she needs you to do. Oh, let me show you one more thing, because I know I haven't told you enough things, right? Here is a self-assessment of the situational factors. So this is very much what the rubric is going to look like, but this is just a portion of it. So if you wanted to take a look at this is totally up to you. This is that building in kind of assessment as you go. You could begin to look at your situational factors and see if you've done these things. Just evaluate yourself. This is the rubric that we'll use, and so you can take a look at those first pieces if you want to take an initial look at that. Then so for tomorrow, where's the folder where you can find examples? Sorry.
Is it right there?
Yeah, where is it?
You need to make it visible.
I can see it though. It's right there. So I do need to make it visible. So these say they're excellent. Fink says they're excellent. I don't know if you know this, but you can, when you write these course redesigns, you can actually turn them in to Dee Fink's outfit, and they publish them. They publish these and make them available. And in some departments on campus, it would be considered a peer-reviewed publication, and some it wouldn't. So you want to take a look at that and see it. And it might be considered one, but a lower level one. But if you're going to write this and put all the work into it, some of you may want to do that. So here's a folder that has examples, and at around 11 tomorrow we're going to do an activity, and we would like for you to just kind of think about looking at one of these. It might be a good idea, let's say for example Martha is very involved in first year seminar, it might be a good idea for her not to look at that one, because she might be so distracted by other things, because that matters so much to her that she's not going to look at the designs carefully. So I'm not going to force that. You can look at one that's that's related to your field, but think about what you want to get from it. Because I think my tendency would be, if I were looking at one, like, I don't think that was the right reading to choose. Or, so you might want to choose one that's not so close to your discipline. And you don't have to analyze it before tomorrow, but kind of have in your head which one you think you want to look at, because you'll be looking at with some others. And I will make it visible. Are you doing that now, Marie? Will you make the materials from today, the seminar materials, visible right there? Okay, and now I'm going to ask Lindsay to talk a little bit about preparation for the video workshop. So, in closing, 20 minutes early. Tomorrow you'll have the UDL workshop in the morning. Then we'll look at some course guides. If you could just look at which one you want to examine with the group. We'll only have about an hour. And again, the idea is just to look at an example so you know the destination, so you know where you're going and what you're going to be doing. It won't be to necessarily critique that particular one. And then we will look at collaborative assessment, and then you'll have some time for writing tomorrow afternoon, kind of independently. And by that time, you'll need some headspace to kind of sort some of this out probably. So I know it's a lot, very quickly, but as Lillian kind of talked about next week, this precious time that we have together, we have to make that count, and then I know you'll have time to develop and design for the month or so after that. So we'll try to feed you well tomorrow. Any questions in closing before we part ways for today? All right, well, I'll be here for a bit if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow morning.